This week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this week. And we are going to be dealing with somewhat a sensitive topic of asking the question, are you overboarded? And joining me, who seems like a stranger these days, but it's good to have him back, is my co-host Scott Cutler, Executive Vice President with the NYSE Euronext. Scott, welcome.
Good to be back.
Looks like you haven't changed or suffered from all your travel.
So more gray hairs.
Yeah, you do have a couple more gray hairs, but at least you have hair, so that's you can look at it that way. So overboarding, it's the reason we're talking about it is it's become an automatic withhold, okay, in certain director situations, which we'll talk about in a minute. But first of all, I want to ask your opinion, in all your travels with just the general issue of somebody being overboarded.
This is, I think, more of an issue of the changing role of a public company director today. The role and responsibility of a public company director is more complex than it's been before. What is required in terms of the time commitment, the work involved, the industry experience is more than it has been in the past. And the regulatory oversight that most boards have, certainly depending on the industry, is certainly higher than it's been before. And so all of this is essentially spelling out the condition that exists today, which is what's required of board members is a significant time commitment. And it's a significant amount of involvement. And I think as shareholders today are expecting more out, I believe, of board members than they have in the past. As a board member, you need to understand the risks of the business, you need to understand the management team, and you need to have a fair amount of understanding of the issues that are in front of the company that you're serving as a director on. And so I understand the issue, which is time is not unlimited when it comes to individuals. And so I guess the answer to the question is, overboarding is, have you reached that personal constraint of the time that you can commit to serving as an effective board member? Is there a limit to that? Clearly there is for each individual. Is that the same for every single person? Clearly not, but there is a limit.
Well, first of all, let's define, in case there's people out there that don't understand the term overboarded. That is where somebody serves on more boards than which they can be effective on each individual one. And to your point, everybody's capacity is going to be different. But one of the things that I think people have to keep in mind is everybody's looking at that capacity in a normal circumstance of, I have these number of committee meetings and these number of board meetings. If a company has a problem, which we've seen let's take an example of the old Health South, okay?
Right.
Health South's board met on a weekly basis, okay?
Right.
Well, if you start to throw that into the mix of your regular board meetings, if you sit on 5 boards, let's say, that starts to become a challenge. In addition, it almost becomes unfair to the other companies because they're trying to schedule committee meetings, board meetings, and all of a sudden you're not available for these things. Well, if you start missing board meetings or committee meetings, now you have an issue with the 75% in attendance. It really is a logical issue, but you have to look at the what ifs as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I think clearly you identified the most pertinent issue, which is obviously participation in board meetings. And clearly if you're a board member that's not participating in board meetings, you're either overboarded or not involved. Either way, it doesn't work.
It's chronic either way.
And so performance of board members is important. It needs to be looked at and reviewed on an annual basis. We've talked about board performance and review. And I think particularly if you're looking for new directors, it has to be one of the questions that you ask, beyond, does this director have something to provide? Are they going to be effective? Do they have the time that is required for this particular board? And that's going to be a function of all the other things that any individual might have on their plate, board membership, as well as maybe they're an executive at a company.
Well, let's look at the specifics of why this is an issue. And when you look at the ISS has a limitation of 6 boards. If you go over 6, you will get automatic withhold. Pretty lenient when you think about 6 boards. BlackRock, as an example, has a review limit of 4. They don't say that they will vote against that, although they admit that they typically do, okay? But they will take into consideration what the situation is and the individual is and then make the decision from that. We've always felt, and it's rare that we would ever be below ISS, but we've always felt when you look at the commitment in today's world that 4 is like still manageable if there's a crisis, but over that it starts to get to a point with all the reasons that we talked about, scheduling, other time, whatever. So it seems like that shouldn't be too difficult to grasp, the logic of being overboarded.
Right.
Well, I mean, are you surprised at ISS, for example?
No, I mean, it seems as though in certain areas they and other organizations like to create these bright lines. We don't have a listing standard at the NYSE or any other public exchange that has a specified or predetermined limit. And clearly some of the advisors are trying to create policies around what that bright line test would be. Again, speaking more personally on this area, this is this is just more an area about performance and effectiveness than it is as to a bright line test. One of the things that I believe the SEC tried to do in terms of the additional disclosure that why is a particular director unique? What are their experiences and qualifications to serve as a director? I think if you are a director who's got more than 4 or more than 6, whatever that number is, you have to be able to sit back there and say, why am I uniquely qualified? Am I attending all of the board meetings that I'm required to attend, and can I serve as an effective board member? And maybe there's a way to be able to treat some of this with disclosure if you are a board member or a company that wants to have a director who's got a unique perspective that may find themselves close to these limits. But again, I'm not a big fan of the bright line test. I think it's the concept of disclosure and then ultimately a board's responsibility to look at participation and performance.
Well, disclosure of that actually seems more relevant than some of the stuff that is required to be disclosed today. So I think that's a good one. The counter argument to this is, from the director's perspective, is there are people that are recently retired or have time that consider themselves, quote, professional directors.
Right.
You find that particularly a lot in the financial expert side, but so do you buy the concept that there are people that are, quote, professional directors?
Well, absolutely. These are individuals that have tremendous industry experience, background that's pertinent to that role. You want a director that's got perspective and industry experience, and a lot of times when those individuals were in a high-performing, high-time requirement job as a C-level executive, you wouldn't have the capacity to serve in some of those roles and responsibilities that you otherwise would. And so I do actually think there's a tremendous amount of value from individuals that are serving these capacities. And again, I think it's up to both the boards that you serve on as well as the individual to determine, what is that capacity? What is your individual capacity to serve effectively? Not just serve on a board, but serve effectively.
Right. Well, we should point out too that is typically, a professional director is typically retired. We forgot to point out that both BlackRock and ISS, if you're a CEO and you're on 2 outside boards other than your own, that's your limit. If you go to 3 as a sitting CEO, you will have a withhold vote, against you automatically.
Yeah.
So the only question about the retired professional director is there becomes a period of time after you retire that if you are not engaged in business, you have the challenge of how do you keep current in what is today's business. Now, serving on the board certainly helps, but as you know, with social media and all that's happening in IT and all that, you also need to be aggressive in being aware of what's happening outside the boardroom to be an effective director.
Look, public directors shouldn't be the exclusive domain for the retired as a concept. And I think what we're looking at today is a time period where a board needs to be able to represent a unique set of both your customers, the industry, experience, and it can't be weighted in any one area. And so you need to be able to have that diverse perspective on the board. And I think that's very important today. I mean, if you're a CEO, you really want help and experience to be on the board, to be able to call upon, to be able to lead the company. And so I think it's really important.
Yeah. Last point that relates to this. I'm sort of surprised at the number of companies that I come across that actually prohibit their CFO or in some cases their GC from serving on any outside public companies other than their own, if in fact they serve on that, which is rare as well. If you were CEO or at a company, would you prohibit your CFO from serving on a board, or if you were the board chair, would you be reluctant to have them give up some of your own time at your own company for the experience of serving on the board?
What's required of a C-level executive for most public companies is a pretty significant time commitment. So if it were me, I want to make sure that, number one, can they do the job that's being requested of them? And then it's one of perspective and balance. I do find, and this is more from a personal perspective, my own involvement with boards. While I can't serve on a public board, given my position, I do serve on the board, a couple of boards of nonprofits. I've learned a lot from that experience. I've gained a unique perspective from serving in that capacity. And I think the opportunity that many executives could learn either outside their own industry or in the industry by serving on the board actually adds to your professional experience and perspective. And so I think it's one that you have to have an open mind to. I don't know if I'd have an open policy to it against it. I'd probably encourage some outside board involvement. It's a great experience.
Yeah, till I was part of the exchange, I did have the opportunity to serve on an outside board, and as a growth tool and experience tool, I'm not sure that there is a better tool if any candidate, like a CFO, is a candidate for the top position. I would be encouraging them to have the experience of doing that. To me, it's a perfect training ground for somebody to have that experience. I understand that if that's going to hurt the existing company, then that's an issue. But most of the times, I think it's short-sighted to not think about how that person could gain an experience on doing that. But we don't have to worry about that at this point, do we? So anyway, sensitive topic. Again, you and I agree that it's the kind of thing that shouldn't have the hard line that has to be looked at, but that it also is logical to have a director serve on what they can contribute to significantly.
But if you're chair of the board and you're asking of the board what is its effectiveness And this has to be an area of focus. You have to be able to look at every single board member and ask, do you have the time, and can you give the time that's required to serve on this board? And the answer to that is no. Call it overboarding, call it whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that's really the key question that everybody should be asking.
Do you know, we're going to have to keep you in town more for this. These discussions are among the best that we do, and I hope that the audience has found this one useful. And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show, and it was a pleasure having Scott back with us. We hope you join us next week, where we'll take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member and committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.